It was natural for Ivarage to be convinced of its victory, however. Naive. Guy had a look of composure. Whirl pierced Ivarage. Kayaha. Ivarage could not understand what had happened. Just before touching Guy's body, the condensed destruction ray had dissipated. The reason lay in Guy's authority. For Guy, who could reproduce Rimuru's authority, gluttonous King Beelzebub, emission-type attacks were nothing but food to be predated. Guy, who could have predated Ivarage's attacks from the beginning, had dared to dodge them because he was aiming for this moment. Since he hadn't consumed much energy, Guy had already fully recovered the moment he ate the current attack. Guy declared arrogantly. Ha. As usual, you're no big deal. Hearing that, Ivarage raised a voice of resentment. You. The moment it thought it had won, it felt as though it had been thrust into hell. Before it could understand that this was anger, it began screaming in frustration. Ivarage glared at Guy. The beautiful face resembling Lucia was distorted with hatred. The strike just now was something Ivarage could not ignore. It wasn't a fatal wound, but it had taken damage significant enough to be conscious of it for the first time. This was a nostalgic experience for Ivarage. Back then, the cause had also been Guy, and remembering that made the anger well up even more. At this moment, for the first time in its life, Ivarage recognized Guy as an enemy. As if targeting the blank space in that consciousness, Ivarage's body was enveloped in a multitude of lights. Although Vildor and the others had turned into mere spectators, they had received an order from Guy via thought communication. Get yourselves pumped and ready to unleash a full power attack on my signal. Hearing this, Vildor grumbled. That Guy, acting all high and mighty. Milim jumped on this sentiment. Exactly. To think he would order me around. She was unable to finish that sentence. That was because, at that moment, a chill wind blew through. Order you around. What was that? Say, Milim. And you too, Vildor-chan. Do you have some sort of complaint? Go on, say it, Velzard smiled as she implied. No. I have no complaints whatsoever. Me neither. Of course, I will cooperate. Thank you. Since it's a request from Guy, we have to listen properly, don't we? Being threatened or rather, requested by Velzard in such a manner, everyone present had agreed. And so, they watched the battle unfold. Guy, dodging the focused destruction beams with ample composure, even had a smile floating on his lips. While a direct hit might not be immediately fatal, there were dangerous attacks that couldn't be ignored. Despite this, Guy didn't seem to perceive them as a threat. Seeing Guy like this, Vildor grumbled. However, sister, isn't Guy being too careless? Even if a hit wouldn't kill him, he wouldn't get off scot-free. He should be more serious and cautious. It is fine to have composure, but Vildor thought Guy was taking it too far. He pointed this out honestly, but Velzard's reply was curt. Listen here, Vildor-chan. Unlike you, Guy is strong. Stop trying to measure him by your standards. Being told this with a smile, Vildor thought. I am strong too, though. However, possessing the wisdom to keep his mouth shut, he simply nodded silently. There is a theory that rather than wisdom, he was simply terrified of his sister, but for the sake of Vildor's honor, thinking too deeply about it would mean defeat. Ivarage's attacks grew steadily more fierce and precise. Seeing this, Milim began to make a fuss this time. Mumumu, is he really okay? He is a demon lord, I acknowledge, but Ivarage was truly strong, you know. Guy's fighting style involved dodging attacks by a hair's breadth. Because he would occasionally get grazed, it made those watching feel on edge. Furthermore, knowing the weight of a single blow from Ivarage, everyone other than Velzard watched with anxiety. Velgrund remained silent because she didn't want to anger her sister. While bracing herself to provide immediate backup should anything happen to Guy, she was building up her secret art internally to answer Guy's request. It was the most diligent and correct response. Velzard understood this as well and said nothing to Velgrund. Instead, she gently warned Vildor and Milim, get ready soon. And then, the moment arrived. A focused destruction beam fired from Ivarage's chest, scored a direct hit on Guy's chest. See, look at that, Vildor thought. I knew it. Milim also thought. They didn't think Guy would die from this, but a reduction in fighting power was unavoidable. If it had happened while fighting at full power, that would be one thing, but if he failed after facing it alone and showing off his composure, then he couldn't complain about being criticized. Therefore, the two prepared to blame him right then and there, intending to insist that they should challenge the enemy together without being stubborn, but before they could speak, the command flew from Guy. Now. In this instant, Vildor and Milim unleashed their ultimate arts reflexively. Milim, naturally, fired a full-power Drago Nova. With an output strong enough to shatter the equipment on both her hands, she blasted it toward Ivarage. Vildor fired a Thunderstorm human version Ver. 2. This was the very killing technique he had attempted to use against a rampaging Milim, only to be stopped by Chloe. Its energy density was higher than the Thunderstorm fired in his dragon form. Mimicking Millam's pose, he thrust both palms forward, wrists together like the jaws of a dragon, and fired with full power. Valgrind was excellent. Without delay, she fired cardinal acceleration at maximum output. And Velzard, too, had already unleashed Whiteout Absorb first and foremost. She had planned to reprimand anyone who was late, but fortunately, there were no such delinquents, so Velzard was satisfied. Thus, just as Guy intended, the four ultimate arts overlapped simultaneously. As they were the powerhouses who could be called the apex of this world, their timing was perfect. In that instant, tremendous destructive power was generated, just as Guy had desired. Good work, you guys. Guy praised him. It was a rare occurrence, though Millam and Vildor were likely dissatisfied, thinking he sounded high and mighty. Setting that aside, Guy had no intention of leaving the conclusion of the battle with Ivarage to others. Activating gluttonous King Beelzebub as if it were his own, he devoured the unprecedented energy that should have raged wildly on the spot. He then integrated it, wrapping Millam's Drago Nova around it as a separate casing, and reconstructed it into a single directional wave. It was an unbelievable act. The integrated energy of destruction began to swirl around Ivarage. Kayaha. The smile had vanished from Ivarage. It understood that if hit directly by that amount of energy, it would not survive unscathed. At the same time, doubts arose as to why that decisive moment had not yet arrived. The ultimate destructive energy continued to circulate around Ivarage. Seeing this, Vildor and Millam were indignant yet astonished. My power. Gry. Pulling a stunt like Rimuru. To think even my power is being utilized, I can hardly believe it. He is being too reckless. Velzard and Valgrind were more exasperated than surprised. Oh my, if he can pull off something like that, we couldn't have won no matter what we did. I agree. That game with Rudra, it would have ended if Guy just stepped out himself. That's true. That is exactly why he insisted on a proxy war, I suppose. It was just as Velzard said. There is no fun in a game where victory is guaranteed. Guy believes that if you are going to compete with someone, it is only proper to bear some risk. Diablo is the same, and Testarossa, Carrere, and Ultima would agree. Even Misery and Rain would likely accept this way of thinking. Because there is a possibility of losing, competition is interesting. This was a way of thinking common to the primordials. And, Guy was strong in competition. Since his defeat by Valdanava, he had never experienced a single loss. In the past, it was Guy who repelled Ivarage. And that remained true this time as well. Here, I'll give you something painful. Taste this until you die. Catastrophe Eclipse. Guy unleashed the technique. It fused with the destructive energy circulating around Ivarage, demonstrating its true worth. Catastrophe Eclipse, this secret art is the power of Rune. It has aspects similar to Moss's Infinite Eater, but its essence is completely different. It is a malicious technique that diverts the energy contained within it to inflict damage, and then sustains that damage. It allows for versatile use, and can be stacked or fired in rapid succession. On top of that, damage once inflicted will never heal. If there is physical injury, recovery magic and the like are rendered null and void. Since natural healing energy is exhausted one piece after another, it was a vicious ability where running out of strength was inevitable. This time, he incorporated not only his own maximum energy, but also the power of Vildor and the others into this technique. All of it was converted into negative energy that annihilates all creation, biting into Ivarage. It was practically a pseudo-nihility. In terms of controllability, it could be said to be safer and superior. Once their energy recovers, Guy and the others can unleash this technique again. In contrast, unless Ivarage breaks Guy's Catastrophe Eclipse, there is no way for it to recover to full health. Maintaining the status quo is the best it can do, and a future of steadily draining away awaited it. So I was hit with that too, huh? Millam muttered quietly. She had no memory of it, but she knew the story that she had been brought back to her senses by Guy and Ramrus when she went on a rampage. She hadn't been told the method, but she thought that with this technique, it would be possible. In fact, she was correct. No matter how much Millam's power increased, Guy adjusted the balance by weakening her. It isn't as easy as it sounds, but because he accomplished it, the present exists. Guy's unparalleled combat sense combined with his ultimate authority created a secret art specialized against spiritual life forms, effective even against true dragons. That's nasty. Vildor nodded in agreement with Millam, dumbfounded. Vildor also had memories of losing to Guy. He insisted it had nothing to do with his current self, but a loss is a loss. Before that, the problem was that he didn't remember how exactly he had lost. Since there was no guarantee he could win if they fought next, Guy was a target of vigilance for Vildor as well. Incidentally, since he was practically defeated by his two sisters before even fighting, calling them objects of terror rather than vigilance was the correct answer. Setting Vildor's story aside. Gigigigigigi. Ivarage thrashed about in frustration. Curse marks were carved all over its body, leaking magicules. Unless Guy cancelled his authority, this state would continue. Even if Ivarage boasted an unimaginably vast amount of magical energy, it should eventually run out of strength at this rate. The time for conclusion was drawing near. Feeling intense pain, likely for the first time since its birth, Ivarage raged madly. It slashed blindly at Guy, was parried, and crashed into the wall. The heavenly tower shook violently, and cracks appeared on the wall surface that should have been indestructible. Haha, look at that. It seems my catastrophe eclipse can even negate the laws established by Veldanava. Guy laughed happily. The absolute immutable providence established by God that was now wavering due to Guy's authority. And rightfully so, for Guy's ultimate skill, prideful King Lucifer had acquired new abilities and achieved a transcendental evolution. Its name is Ultimate Skill, God of Abyssal, Nodens. Resulting from Guy observing the ability alteration Rimuru performed on Velzard and modifying his own authority under his own interpretation, this authority was born. It surpassed existing authorities. Ultimate Skill, God of Abyssal, Nodens. The powers included in this were diverse. Thought acceleration, universal perception, demon lord's hockey, soul gluttony, imaginary space, ability creation, ability duplication, ability preservation, space-time domination, multidimensional barrier. It had become something that encompassed everything Guy had mastered up to this point. It was truly an authority that had reached the domain of God. Guy wore a fearless smile as he glared down at Ivarage. Having taken the full brunt of Guy and the others' techniques, it finally seemed to have sustained fatal damage. Conversely speaking, since there was zero possibility of defeating it without doing this much, it was undoubtedly an outrageous monster. Even so, Guy wins. Even if it had been a one-on-one battle, he should have been able to handle it without issue. However, it would have taken too much time, and immense collateral damage would have been unavoidable. This time, he was able to borrow the power of his comrades, and thanks to the favorable condition of the battlefield being the heavenly tower, the damage was kept to a minimum. That was lucky, Guy was satisfied. Even so, Guy switched his train of thought. As expected, this authority is terrifying. He truly thought Rimuru was fearsome. He understood it after trying out the ultimate skill God of Abyssal, Nodens, which he had evolved himself. With soul gluttony that can eat anything and convert it to energy, emission-type techniques are nothing but food. On top of that, the combination of instant teleportation and swordsmanship is invincible, and if I focus on defense, I don't feel like I'd suffer a single scratch. There's no element where I'd lose in a battle of attrition. Guy analyzed himself. And at the same time, he thought, Rimuru is truly absurd. Seeing Rimuru's authority, Guy realized. He understood that the concept of combat had changed. The size of magical energy reserves was no longer a factor that determined victory or defeat. As long as one has soul gluttony to eat the opponent's energy and make it their own, one can assert there is no defeat. What mattered was the means to inhibit the opponent's recovery. Against an opponent who did not possess that, victory was certain. If he didn't have this terrifying authority, he would have struggled much more against Ivarage. But this is not the end. Watching Ivarage thrashing while groaning in pain, Guy turned his consciousness toward the next battle.